The American President Donald Trump will be visiting China soon, and he would be building on the trade relations with China. But what does the Tibetan community in exile think about Trump's visit to China, but also about their own cause of survival and political rights? Joining us right now is the Sikyong, Honorable President of the Tibetan government in exile, Penpa Tsering. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Pleasure to see you again.
Same here. Let me begin by asking you, because I want to continue to thread. Last time when I had spoken to you, you said that developed nations should not be funding China or developing trade to bring them to their knees. How do you now measure this particular visit of US President Donald Trump to China, not just to mend the ties, but perhaps build on trade relations?
Now, trade is essential for the growth of the whole global economy, not just one country, or not just making some people more richer.
Yes.
It has to be there for everybody. So, and a lot of things have evolved since we talked last time. American tariff, China's zero tariff with other countries, war in Middle East. Every development will have its impact on the Xi-Trump summit if it happens by the middle of May. So we'll have to see how things pan out, what are the leverages that the United States will use with the Chinese, or the Chinese with the United States. But right now, I think it's more of energy security that concerns the whole world, and particularly China's trade with Iran on oil and all the shadow fleets, numbering about 500, that continues to trade. Now, after the U.S. blockade, it has stopped. But otherwise, it will have a lot of implications all around. So we're watching how things are going to pan out.
May I then ask you that, if not trade, what would be your message or your expectation from the US president? Because US has been a great supporter of the Tibetan cause for years and decades. When Trump meets Xi Jinping, what would be your expectation that he conveys to the Chinese president on Tibet?
Now, on Tibet particularly, I don't know whether those issues will come up or not, because President Trump has never mentioned Tibet so far in his first presidency, in his second presidency. But he did sign the Tibet Support and Policy Act of 2020 into law, and he also signed the new appropriation bills, which also talks about further appropriation bill to consider Central Tibetan administration as the Tibetan government in exile. So this is also a new development during the Trump presidency in his second term. So there have been developments on all around. I think Chinese will be looking at whether the United States will use Tibet as a leverage at this point of time, because a special coordinator for Tibetan issues was appointed just a few months ago, when initially the talks was to happen by the end of March. Now it has been postponed to mid-May. So all these developments are happening. I think the Chinese are also studying U.S. policy on Tibet and possible use of leverage of Tibet by the United States government of China. So, but then we'll have to see what transpires on a larger level.
You mentioned about the Tibet Act, so I have to ask you about the U.S. State Department's Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs. In the latest annual report, says in the Congress that Tibet remains China's most restricted region, with no access to journalists or diplomats. How do you see that? This has been happening, it's been a trend for years and decades together. But why is Beijing tightening its nose around the people in Tibet and not giving access to journalists and diplomats?
Because Beijing always calls Tibet a socialist paradise. They think that they have turned Tibet into a paradise, because they always said that Tibet was slavery, serfdom, emancipation from all this. Now, when you talk with Chinese historians, the very reason that China says that they have freed Tibet from serfdom, if you look at Chinese history, you see no mention of slavery or serfdom in Tibet. in Chinese history. There are mentions of slavery on China-Manchuria border, China-Mongolia border, within China itself, but there was no mention of slavery at all in Tibet. Either there was no slavery in Tibet or Tibet was not part of China. That's the reason why China does not have records of all this history. So we will have to now work on countering China's narratives on Tibet, whether it's history, whether it's Tibetan language, or whether it's Buddhism, because Tibetan Buddhism came from the Nalanda tradition of Indian Buddhism, not from China. But China's narratives today is that Tibetan Buddhism came from China. So we have to come out with all these truths, whether it's history or religion or culture, everything that defines Tibetan identity. So our focus will be working more on the legal status of Tibet internationally. That is why now we'll have to work more with UK, because UK is the only European country that has a historical relationship with Tibet, because they invaded Tibet in 1903, 1904, where there was no China to defend Tibet at all. And it's a fact. So these facts needs to be made known. Of course, India knows the fact. British India had its relation with Tibet for more than 2 centuries, starting from 1774, the first visit of a Britisher to Tibet. So based on all these realities and facts, historical facts, we have to challenge China's narratives.
You mentioned the narratives. Interestingly, over the last few months, we've seen a very sustained disinformation campaign being launched by China against the Tibetan parliament in exile, your leaders in exile, and in particular you. We've also seen, I've come across narratives from the Global Times where you are being mocked in a way. How do you really counter this kind of provocative, I would say, messaging that is coming in from China? Does one ignore it completely like some do, or is it time to respond back?
I look at it from a different perspective. I always thank the Chinese government for being our best publicity agent. So when they write about Tibetan democracy in exile,
yes,
that shows that they are concerned. And the very fact that I got re-elected again, and that we have a May 27 inauguration or swearing-in ceremony where some of the Tibetan non-governmental organizations have reached out to many countries to attend the inauguration. So we also found that the Chinese ambassador in Nepal reached out to the Nepalese Home Minister, telling him not to send any representative to attend the Tibetan, the Sikyong's inauguration. So that shows that China is concerned that the democracy in exile is making an impact, and that it's contributing to the sustainability of the Tibetan movement as a whole. And as we speak, of course, His Holiness is 91. He's doing very well. Mentally also very sharp. He still keeps meeting 400, 500 people 6 days in a week. Earlier it used to be 3 days in a week, every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Now it's 6 days a week. Apart from Sunday, he meets with a lot of people. So when His Holiness is alive, we have to try to find a solution. And His Holiness has been preparing us for so many decades to be responsible for our own cause. That's also the reason why an ordinary person like me is in this position of Sikyong. So there are a lot of things that we will need to do, despite whatever Chinese government is saying. Of course, they will say all derogatory things, democracy or election without a land, and that is exactly what we are. We are unique in a sense that among all exiled communities in India, in the world, Tibetans are the only one, because of the vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that we have a fully functional democratic polity in exile. And we have elections as we speak. We just concluded the final election for the parliament, and the countings are going on as we speak. So the success of democracy outside Tibet cannot be stomached by the Chinese government, which is authoritarian and which could be seen as a challenge to the authoritarian regime. So now I start calling Chinese government structure more like autocratic capitalists in the garb of communism. There's no communism apart from the Politburo and the leadership who wants to control and rule with an iron fist. Otherwise, communism does not. It's more capitalist than any other capitalist country in this world. Its economy is driven by exports. So we look at what China is today, what China is saying today, what China is really doing today. When they speak internationally, they have these global initiatives of governance, civilization, security, everything. And they speak about peace, dialogue, even in the context of Middle East, because it affects them in terms of energy security. But what they're actually doing and what they're actually saying are always two different things. So that's how you should judge China. Not by what they are saying, but by how they are doing things. So if you look at all the hegemonistic ambition of the Chinese government in the region, then you see that all the defense expenses of all the countries around China are increasing. It's because of China's belligerence and hegemonic ambitions, which started from invasion of Tibet in 1950. So it still persists. So we have to understand China more from what and how they're doing things than by listening only to their rhetoric.
Fair enough. Just a day ago, I returned from McLeodganj, and I had the blessings of Dalai Lama. I had the opportunity to meet him, and I could see a certain glow on his face. And of course, more than 500 people who had tears in their eyes, meeting him, seeking his blessings. When you meet him, or perhaps when you have some kind of a chat about the future of the Tibetan people or the Tibetan cause, what is His Holiness's message to you? You have a defined political role, but what would His Holiness would expect from you in the coming months and years?
Now, His Holiness doesn't say those kind of things. I think he has done it from 1960 onwards when he introduced democracy in exile. And that from that time onwards, he has been preparing the generations of Tibetans to take over the responsibility. That is why he democratized also based on how people are going to adapt to the situation and be responsible towards the situation. That's why I keep saying, when we travel abroad or when we travel to India, we receive some respect from government, from foreign officers, from parliaments, mainly because of His Holiness Dalai Lama. So when His Holiness is alive, one of our job would be to institutionalize our relationship with governments like Government of India or any other government that we deal with, so that it will set a precedent for future governments to look at protocols as to how the governments treated the Sikyong earlier days. So 15, 20, 25 years down the line, when His Holiness is no more with us also, we should be able to fill that gap, that interregnum, till the next Dalai Lama matures to take responsibility. So this is one of the areas that we'll be working on. The other area is to increase our visibility of meeting with higher levels of people in governments, in different governments around the world. And then also preparing for future. I've mentioned to you earlier also, if there has to be a solution to the Sino-Tibet conflict, it has to come from China. It cannot come from anywhere else. So we'll have to look at different scenarios for China. Now, right now, China exists on one pillar, just President Xi Jinping. He is the president of the government. He is the general secretary of the party. He is the chairman of the Central Military Commission. So it's standing on one pillar. You'll never know what's going to happen to that one pillar. So with external forces within implosion within, there could be so many causes or conditions that could bring about change in China. So under every given scenario, we will have to look at what are the possible challenges for Tibetans, what are the possible opportunities for Tibetans, and how can we take advantage of these situations, how can we work with other groups to strengthen our collective position. So these are some of the things that we will need to do, apart from making sure that the the Central Tibetan Administration, Dharamsala, administration is well-oiled to make sure that the civil servants are empowered to take on their responsibilities. So whoever comes after me 5 years down the line, they don't have to worry too much about the administration, but think more about reaching out globally to the international community and seek support of Tibet.
As someone who observes China very, very closely, do you see some kind of fragmentation? Do you see some kind of a silent change brewing within China? And secondly, how is the situation in Tibet? Because as I mentioned, there is no access to journalists or diplomats, and even if journalists are taken, they are not allowed to film. They are allowed to film in a certain way, in a certain propaganda fashion. So what is the situation in Tibet? How do you see the Chinese society, the Chinese government, and the atmosphere brewing out there right now?
Now, the two sessions which concluded on March 12 this year in China, the legislation passed a law called the Ethnic Unity and Progress Law. The Chinese always have very nice names when they do bad things. So the whole idea of this ethnic unity law is to make sure that the identity of the nationalities, or the Tibetans, or the Mongolians, or the East Turkestanis, are wiped out. So that's the whole idea of this ethnic unity law. And now they have been implementing this for several years, including the colonial-style boarding schools, which is part of the program, to create a common nation of Chinese people, a melting pot of everything, not having, all these identities of 55, 56 nationalities, including Han. So this gives them the garb of a legal framework under which they can suppress people at any level. It does not cover only Tibet, but it also covers internationally anybody who opposes this law or acts against this law. So from the top to the bottom to the people, everybody has been entrusted responsibilities to make sure that this law is carried out. So if this is done in the manner that they want to do, it's going to be very, very consequential for the Tibetans. I think that itself will define what it says, because right now the situation in Tibet is more like what has been happening in East Germany with the SS, where every family member is spying on another family member. You can't trust anybody because you could be reported, because the anti-espionage law, which has penetrated to the grassroots level. So that's how China controls and makes sure that Tibetan language is not used in schools. Tibetan Buddhism is a custom designed to meet with the Chinese government's needs, also introducing, teaching loyalty to Chinese government and the Communist Party and all that. So at every level of government, people cannot do anything because there's too much surveillance and control. The only few people who are allowed to come in are also very restricted in their approaches. Forget about foreign journalists. Even Tibetans who are allowed to come in are very restricted in their movement. So all those things have been happening. So the situation, there's not much violence because people are not allowed to do anything. There's no protests, even peaceful protests, because there's clampdown on all this. People don't take up violence in the first place. So those things are there inside Tibet. It continues to be very, very grave, very critical. If there is no change, then it could be very, very detrimental in our effort to preserve the centuries-old Tibetan language and culture and religion and heritage. Now, inside China, all of us know the system is very opaque, but then now, these days, a lot more news are coming compared to earlier. So, Xi Jinping, after having taken over the Communist Party about 12 years ago, has removed more than 110 military generals in the name of anti-corruption. So, he's supposed to be removing corruption inside China, but then again, this policy is aimed at destroying all his opponents. But on the other hand, they are promoting corruption everywhere else around the world. with the kind of influence they use through the United Workfront Department, they influence prime ministers, foreign ministers, ambassadors who had worked in China in different nations. So influence of the United Workfront Department internationally has increased manifold, and Chinese government is putting in a lot of resources into these efforts, not just working at political level, but also at cultural, even artistic levels, to make sure that Tibet and Tibetans are not mentioned, that Tibet is removed out of the memory of the world. That's the effort that Chinese government is making. And we also see now military is the backbone of Communist Party. And we have seen a lot of purges in the military. That also points towards power struggle. The more purges you have, the people working at the lower levels also have their loyalty towards certain leaders. So those also get disaffected. So these are some of the leadership problems in the military or in the Communist Party. You see so many purges, people being removed. Even without military, the latest removal of the former Xinjiang or the East Turkestan governor was an example of not having a military background, but a civilian background being removed. But other people like Zhang Yusha and others were all with military background. So there are a lot of symptoms of a bigger malaise within there. Now, if you look at China's economy, everybody talks about the downward spiraling of domestic consumption, increasing output, not finding enough market, pressurizing other governments to buy more from China. If you talk with governments, they will tell you that it's not a free trade with China. China is pressurizing you to buy more, otherwise they won't sell you rare earth. So that's a condition. They have a chokehold on rare earth, including the United States. That's why the United States is not able to do as much as they would like to do. So within China also, now are Chinese people happy with what's going on now? The younger generations of Chinese have seen so much development in the last several decades with their parents. Their parents from very ordinary life have become middle class or better than middle class. Some have become millionaires, billionaires. All those things have happened on the one hand. But on the other hand, the younger generation wants to do much better than the older generation. Now those opportunities are being deprived. That's why you have concepts like lie flat, young people not going to work, or young people going back to their families, just serving their parents for their survival. So all these things are happening, and there are a lot of discontented people. And Chinese government always say, they are watching over the discontented people, whether it's the elderlies who don't have pension system, or youth who are disgruntled, not happy with with the employment opportunities and all that. But when the Chinese government say they are watching over, then it means that they are watching over whether these disgruntled groups will create problems for the Chinese Communist Party, not to relieve them of their problems. So if you look at many dimensions, you never know when a new spark can, set fire to the whole Communist Party.
Fair enough.
That is why we look at different scenarios.
If I can take this forward, on the question of the future of Dalai Lama, the next Dalai Lama. Of course, on his 90th birthday, His Holiness came out with a series of protocols that will be followed, a group that will look into it, etc., the hints that would be there. But what kind of a strategy do you think Beijing has to counter this? Do you think that they are already working on some kind of a larger game plan on putting across a Chinese Dalai Lama in place of the ritual that is followed here by the Dalai Lama himself?
If you look at what Chinese government has been doing over the last more than 2 decades on His Holiness reincarnation, then it seems most likely that Chinese government will appoint one. So in that case, now they have 3 positions. I think we discussed this last time also. One is that the Dalai Lama, they will look for the 14th Dalai Lama's reincarnation within China. They are not saying within Tibet also, within China. So a communist government that does not believe in any religion, forget about life after death and all that, is ordering His Holiness not to be reborn outside China, which is absurd. It's His Holiness Dalai Lama who is going to be reborn, and he has to decide where he is going to be reborn, not the Chinese government. It's not something for Chinese government to decide. And the second position of the Chinese government is that traditionally they used to use a golden urn, which was supposed to have been introduced in 1793 by the Qings to the Tibetans when they had little influence over the Tibetans. Now, when we look at historical documents, including one Chinese professor called Professor Lau Hanxiang, he found no reference of golden urn in Chinese historical records during the Qing period. Of course, before that there was never ever one. And in the Tibetan historical records also, we don't find any mention of this 1793 29-point guideline that mysterious came out through all the narratives. So my argument is there have been 8 Dalai Lamas before 1793. So were the 8 Dalai Lamas before 1793 were not the real Dalai Lamas, or were they not chosen through traditional means? Because those were the real traditional means till the Qing tried to, if there was documentary evidence, to intervene or interfere in the process. Some say even if it was there, it was more like a suggestion from the Qing Empire to the Tibetans, to use the golden urn. So despite all that, during 13th and 14th Dalai Lama, golden urn was never used. Golden urn was used by the Chinese to select the 11th Panchen Lama. Because after His Holiness Dalai Lama selected the Khendichu Nyima as the 11th Panchen Lama, then Chinese went against the decision of His Holiness and chose their own boy. They used the golden urn. They put a cotton thing beneath the name that they need to choose, and there are evidence of these people who have been there. They have written books on how it was manipulated by the Chinese for their political ends. And today Chinese government is saying that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is using it for his political ends. And this is a tradition that is very unique to Tibet and Tibetan Buddhism. It does not exist in any other Buddhist communities elsewhere around the world, including within China. So the whole concept of golden urn is a creation of a myth by the Chinese government. We are also planning to hold a history conference within this financial year to focus on some of these areas where there are now new historical findings from the Chinese. Because when the Chinese government says, in historical records we have this fact in that page number, it does not exist. If you go look for that source, that's why they're used to lying. And the third position they keep saying is that they will be the final signatory to the seal. They will put the final seal to the recognition of His Holiness reincarnation. So all these are very absurd. Government that does not believe in any religion, government that does not allow its communist members to go into monasteries, even visit monastery, carry rosaries. Any symbol of spiritualism is not allowed, but they want to be involved in choosing their next time for its political ends. But then again, now what the Chinese government has been trying to do with their appointed Panchen Lama is now they keep sending him back to Tibet more often than what they used to do before. Like last year, he was there for several months, including giving a Kala Chakra teaching. He didn't give that outside Tibet Autonomous Region when there was a Kala Chakra teaching some few years ago by Amdo Lama, where there were hundreds of thousands of people. If Chinese pension organizers, there should be more, and this does not happen. So they don't do it outside Tibet, but they did it in Shigache. And people are in a flux as to, they don't know what to do. If you're a Communist Party member, you're not supposed to visit monasteries. Now you are being forced to go and listen to the Chinese pensions, Buddhist teachings. So you have all these dichotomies, all these paradoxes in Chinese approaches. If you look at Chinese approaches, it's always a paradox. It's always one against another. It's always yin-yang, negative, positive thing. So what we see is that they might tell the world that, oh, the Tibetans themselves, led by the Panchen, also has historical, responsibility. They formed their own select committee, and then they selected. We did only the final seat. That is what I think the position they are taking and the direction they are moving. So we have to be prepared for all this. So from our side, we have got the whole Tibetan community in exile because the Tibetans inside cannot express themselves. And we got the larger Tibetan world in the Trans-Himalaya, Mongolia, in Russian republics also, new adherents to Tibetan Buddhism. We reached out to the larger Buddhist world. And then to the international community, where we got support of the US government way back in 2020 on His Holiness Reincarnation. And then on July 6th of last year, as we celebrated 90th birthday of His Holiness Dalai Lama, there were statements from UK, Germany, France, Netherlands, Iceland, Estonia and Lithuania, 7 countries together on the freedom of religious belief for the Tibetan people and the right to choose their reincarnation, particularly His Holiness Dalai Lama. Then I attended the Article 18 Alliance of Religious Freedom in Czech Republic last November. That represented about 38 different countries. Most were government officials and religious freedom ambassadors. So they also passed a resolution on that. So we are garnering international support to show to the Chinese government what the free world, what the international community wants regarding His Holiness Dalai Lama's reincarnation.
Right. One last question before I let you go. On India, you've been here for decades together. You've got a Tibetan government in exile here, and we've seen Prime Minister wishing His Holiness on his birthdays regularly. There have been exchanges that happen. There is Buddhist conferences also happening here, and there is a public support, a public sentiment here in India in support of the Tibetan cause for a free Tibet. How do you see the future of the relationship with India, with Indian government? Because we are living in a very uncertain world, a deeply divided world, where India says that dialogue and diplomacy is the only way forward. So do you think a dialogue with India or a back channel with China would be possible at this stage, or something that you envision?
I have always said that whenever we reach out to the international community, including India, every country will have their national interests first. No country will leave their national interest for the interests of Tibetans. So given that fact, and the very fact that we exist here as a government in exile is because of the government of India and the people of India. Otherwise we don't exist. And that's also because of the historical relationship, because our script came from India, our religion came from India. So we are culturally and religiously, linguistically more aligned with India than any other nation in this world, including China. So that is why sometimes Tibetans have this sentiment that India has natural responsibility to protect its student, the Tibetans and Tibet. But having said that, we have to take the pragmatic approaches. That's why we keep our expectations also reasonable, given the global political situation. So whatever it is, so far, it is because of Government of India that we exist. Even now, we exist because of Government of India. And Indian government has been very, very hospitable to the Tibetans. And we will never forget that. But then again, there are speculations because of the new global dynamism that is happening. India is becoming more closer to China. But then you always watch, I always say you have to watch this over a longer period. It's not just something that you can make an analysis of what happened in the last 1 year or 6 months. There will be a lot of dynamism. There will be a lot of national interests at play. There will be a lot of dependencies also because of supply chains. So till India becomes independent of those supply chains, even this morning I was reading that India's trade with China is growing, but the deficit is growing more. It has grown up to 112 billion, which means India is exporting only about 19 billion to China, and China is exporting 112 billion to, and the gap is rising every single month. Now, if it keeps rising, then it's a serious concern. Connecting to what I said earlier also,
Yes.
not to give too much business to China. So, but I think India also has a lot of things on its plate with China, and maybe not in a position to be too vocal about the cause of Tibet. But we always believe that India will be on the right side of history. We always have a very transparent relation with the related governmental departments. And the very fact that we are able to reach out to the international community is also because we have base here. So His Holiness has always appreciated better relations between countries, whether it's with US, China, or India, China. Ultimately, what it boils down to is happiness of the people that you administer. So if you have to make your people happy, then you have to be friendly with your neighbors also. I keep saying, whether we like it or not, we don't have an Indian monkey god like Hanuman who is supposed to have power to lift mountains. We don't have a Hanuman to lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere in the Indian Ocean or Pacific or Atlantic, wherever. So whenever we get to go back, we have to live in peace with our neighbors. We have to live in harmony with not just speaking, but practically. Because we are all human beings. We are divided into nations, states, race, languages, and all that. But after all, we are all same human beings, as His Holiness keeps saying. That is why I want to close by responding to your question on the values that His Holiness always promoted. First thing His Holiness always says is, I am just one person out of the 8 billion people in this world. So as one individual, his responsibility is to promote human values, not necessarily dependent on one particular religion, because every religion speaks about good for humanity. So that is very basic. Every single one of us think like His Holiness and contribute to this world, then this world will definitely be a more peaceful world. And the second thing is, the reason why we have religion is to bring peace of mind to people. But then again, religion is being used as a tool to create differences and disharmony among people. That is why His Holiness always promoted, because apart from people who don't believe in religion, they also have the right to do it, atheists. Then every other people have some or other spiritual connection. And politicians have that, presidents have, prime ministers have that. So now when they are in that position of responsibility, how are they not being guided by the values of the religion which was brought by the prophet or the master or whoever taught them, So we are not driven by those values. That is why His Holiness always focused on interreligious harmony conferences, and promoting. He has visited almost every religious places, including Islam, Christianity, Gurdwaras, Hindu temples, Buddhist temples, everywhere. So if we all think in that line, practice your own religion, but respect all other religions, then this will be a much more beautiful place. Then, of course, the third reason is Tibet. Not only because of its political and geostrategic importance, but because of its environmental importance, which affects not only Tibet, but the whole world, and more particularly this region, as a roof of the world, or water tower of Asia, And fourth is preservation of ancient Indian wisdom. Whatever His Holiness is today, he derived that from ancient Indian wisdom. That is why he is starting an institute in Bodh Gaya to study ancient Indian wisdom and Tibetan wisdom. So I think these are values that we have to imbibe from His Holiness and practice on a daily basis in our own lives that can definitely contribute towards a much more peaceful world.
Well, here's hoping that His Holiness's message of peace, harmony, and humanity actually resonates all across the world, and especially in our region. Thank you very much, Mr. Tsering. Always a pleasure.